everyone. Welcome to the channel. I'm back, but I've lost on top of my head. So how are you guys doing? I thought we would do a live today and we can play the rest of that interview, that podcast, and that it's only about 26 minutes left. So I just kind of figured we would go and we would listen to it together. Hey, Sandy D. So let me go ahead. I think I got it already pulled up. Let me find the video. Here it is. Let's start listening. And this right here, this takes up right where we left off in the last video.
About this is that ask a couple of questions about your mom and kind of some of the misperceptions that I think are really will really probably resonate with a lot of fellow survivors. So you've said in interviews that, you know, it's important to you that people don't see or characterize your mother as a monster. And right. That's something that really resonates with me. So how should we see people like your mom? What's a better framing?
Now, C. Williams asked, how can we contact this no one should believe me gal to flood her with messages to do her homework? I'm going to look that up because I want to do the same thing. And as we listen to this today, you're going to see, and she actually admits that she doesn't know what she's talking about. She actually admits it. And I'm going to find out all that information, but I will have, and I've put it in every one of the videos, a link to go to her Spotify. So, but I do have to interrupt every so often so I don't get a copyright.
I think a better framing, and keep in mind that I do go through lots of emotions and I have mixed emotions about this topic on a daily. So one day I could say I don't feel like we should categorize her that way, and the other day I'm still healing. So I'm like, she was terrible and I talk a lot of crap.
But what I think is funny is I've never really heard her talk anything good about her mother. I mean, all I've heard is her calling her mother a piece of shit. That's what I've heard her say about her mother. And to me, that is ridiculous because we know that she was complicit and we know that she was in on the con as well.
At the end of the day, I think, taking my emotions out of it and just working on facts alone, I think that, my mom grew up in a time where...
But hold on, she said working on facts alone. She doesn't even have to listen to the FOIAs. She already knows what's going on. So she's not looking at any facts. She's not looking at anything. All she wants is for people to feel sorry for her to be a victim. That's all she wants. She is a forever victim. Hey, boss lady. Hey, D. Counts and C. Williams.
Mental health was not talked about. It was not addressed. Things, whenever it comes to your emotions and your mental health, was just swept under the rug. So I think it's so vastly important for people to recognize that individuals like this are normally people with low self-esteem. And I feel like given support and therapy and the acknowledgement that this is an issue that they have.
Hey, Teresa. Hi, Sam. But what is she talking about? Because she has not shown her mother any grace at all. And that's what I just don't understand. And as Boss Lady said, she said her mom is her best friend and that she loved her so much. We see it over and over again in the FOIAs, in the Facebook pages that she made. So this to me, I mean, she's just lying. to me, this whole podcast is her trying to be a victim again. Yes, that's right, Sandy D. Her being a forever victim.
It could be addressed and possibly treated. I feel like they're not monsters. And I asked you this question, last year whenever we got to have our chat. I asked you because it was a question that plagued me for so long. Was my mother aware that what she was doing was wrong? And you told me that yes, she was aware.
But she never made Gypsy sick. She never made Gypsy sick. This is what is just so maddening. She never made Gypsy sick. And Gypsy was part of that con. I mean, and I know I have to say allegedly, but how can you be over the age of 18 and you are still complicit and you're still going with the narrative? Yes, boss lady, she is trying to rewrite history. That is exactly what it is.
And of course, I went through my own emotions after that call, but that is something that is hard for survivors. It's a hard pill to swallow.
And I do not like how she says, for survivors. Girl, you killed your mother. You killed your mother. Why are you calling yourself a survivor? You're not a survivor like that. You're not like the Turpin kids. What are you talking about? That's just infuriating. Just infuriating.
And it's something that, no, we can't sweep under the rug that they are, they are aware of it, but maybe you can correct me. Is it something that they cannot control? And then therefore therapy needs to be the intervention.
Maybe it was because she was trying to put a roof over your head, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. She was trying to put a roof over your head. She was trying to feed you. She was trying to make sure that you did not lose your vision, because if you didn't have that eye surgery, you would be blind. So she was a single mom with a deadbeat ex-husband that didn't pay anything until years later, because he was arrested at least 2 times for not paying his child support. So this just doesn't make any sense.
Because I think that, these people are humans, whether their actions are wrong or right or justified, not justified. They are humans and they are someone's loved one. They are someone's mother, they're someone's father, they're someone's caregiver, they're someone to someone. And I know that sounds rich coming from me, but it's just part of it.
I mean, it's extremely complex. And, what you're expressing, those are feelings I've gone through about my own sister.
And see, this woman gets on my nerves because she has not experienced anything like this personally. Her sister went through something. I don't know what she went through, but she went through something. But from my research, I'm not seeing that her sister went through much housing. I just don't understand this woman because she doesn't do her research. To me, she is just putting crap out and not doing her research. And that's the first thing you do whenever you interview someone. You do the research. You find out everything that you can about that person, about that situation before you open your mouth.
I asked that question of Dr. Mark Feldman when I first met him. Does she know? Do people who do this understand what they're doing? Because I think it's a much more comforting idea to think, oh, no, they really believe their kid's sick, or they're, they're confused, or they're having this sort of mental health issue that makes them sort of not culpable for their behavior, right? Because it's really horrible to think about someone doing this in a calculated, premeditated way. And but that is the reality. And I think it's like we can still face that reality and preserve the humanity of it.
Now, guys, she wants to keep talking about Mark Feldman. But if you remember Becca talking about this, Mark Feldman was going to be hired by Scumfield. He was going to be hired. He sent Scumfield sent Mark Feldman all of her information. After 3 months, he went to talk to Mark Feldman, and Mark Feldman never read all of her medical records. He did not do any of the research. So why do they keep on saying this? Because he did not do the research. He did not read her medical files. That is horrible. Oh, just horrible.
Everyone involved. And I think that's important because I think when we make monsters out of perpetrators of crimes, we're holding it at a distance, right? Like as watchers, we're saying, well, that would never happen to anyone I know. That would never happen in my family. That would never happen in my neighborhood. Yeah. That would never be a mom that's on my PTA. And the reality of what we know about this abuse now is that it absolutely could be, your family member, you're in your situation, your.
And this does happen. And that's what I think infuriates me so much, because Munchausen by proxy does happen. But a majority of the time, that child does not survive. They die before their 5th birthday. And this, to me, it's almost a slap in the face to all the victims that have passed because their mother or their caregiver had this disease. It's a slap in the face to them.
Mom did have a history of abuse and came from, I think, as you've really revealed, a family of some pretty significant dysfunction in her own right. Mm-hmm. My sister didn't. Hope Ybarra didn't. There's some perpetrators that come from abusive backgrounds. There's some that don't. It isn't this sort of like cyclical thing that it is in some other forms of abuse. And
what she needs to ask is, how are you with your own child? If she really does have a baby, what is the percentage? What is the percentage of abuse victims? I'm gonna put that in Microsoft Copilot. What is the percentage of domestic abuse victims that hurt their own children? Because I think that's a pretty high amount. I really do. I think that's a high amount. Hold on. Microsoft is looking. But because it says about, this is a wide variety. I need to do research. But 30 to 60% of victims abuse their own children, is what this says. I need to do some research on there, because I know that I read somewhere that a lot of times that abuse victims go ahead and they carry on the abuse with their own children. And I think that's sad.
I think it's important to grapple with it. And I think there are these pieces that really we have to kind of tease out when we're talking about, it's not a single intervention. There's the question of like, can this person be treated? And I know you're going to have a conversation with Dr. Marie Sanders, who's a dear friend. Mm-hmm. And I think we were talking about also setting you up with Dr. Kathy Ayub to maybe have a conversation for this show, which I think would be really helpful to you. But, it's like treatment is very, very challenging with this, very challenging. The reality is there's going to be a very small number of perpetrators who are going to acknowledge their behavior, and that's the first step for treatment. So there is a treatment model. There are steps they can take, but it's a lifelong recovery process. It's, and it's
and not only that, she's not even mentioning, what about the ABUSE that Gypsy did on her own mother? Because we know that she had hurt her own mother. I mean, goodness gracious, she shot her mother with a pew-pew. Yes, it was a pellet one. It wasn't a real one. Then she came after her with like a sword. So what about what Dee Dee had to go through as well?
Unlikely. I think we can assume that, like, yes, we should look at treatment. We should always hold that space. And we have to be kind of realistic about that. And then I think there's the totally separate question of, is this a person who is safe around children?
That is the point. Thank you, Julie. I got some numbers here. About 30% of abused and neglected children will later abuse their own children. Risk factors: a child who is more likely to abuse others as an adult. Impact of witnessing the ABUSE. Boys who witness DV are twice as likely to ABUSE their own partners and children as adults. Long-term consequences: ABUSED children are 11 times more likely to engage in criminal behavior as an adult. And in some studies, 14% of men and 36% of women in prison reported being ABUSED as children. So if we say that, just say if she was ABUSE, ED, just say if she was. So we should just excuse her murdering her own mother, when it looks like 36% of women in prison reported the abuse. What about them? So we just candy coat it because they're not Gypsy Rose Blanchard?
And you can still preserve someone's humanity and say, but okay, you've crossed some lines here where we're not going to take chances leaving children alone in your care. And I wanted to ask you, because this is a question I think that it's really important to me to ask any survivor, like dealing with.
That just makes me so mad because she's not a survivor. She's not a survivor. She is a perpetrator. She's a murderer. And why can't we make this distinction?
Child abuse is quite complicated as a society, right? When is it better to remove the child from that situation? When do we give someone a second chance? What interventions do we use? Just speaking for you, not on behalf of all Munchausen by proxy survivors everywhere. What do you wish had happened?
And why didn't she just move out? She was almost 24 years old. 6 years. She could have just moved out and left. Go live with your father. You think that your life would have been so much better if you just lived with your father. You could have moved with him. Or would Christy not have allowed you to move there because you didn't have that money coming in? Is that the difference now?
In your situation?
I wish that my mom would have been caught early on, because
I agree, Tiffany.
If there could have been something that she got caught, a lie, something, I could have been removed from her care and put in the care of my dad.
Put in the care of her dad. She could have left and went to her dad's. That's what I don't understand. And everybody is acting like she was a child when this happened. She was not a child. She was not a child at all. She was a grown adult in her almost in her mid-20s. In her mid-20s. She could have left. Why didn't she call her dad? Hey, come and get me. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't understand it. It's just it's insane to me.
And that would have avoided so much, because a lot of people, maybe not the the true supporters and the people in our community, but there are the naysayers that don't even acknowledge me as a survivor because they feel that I was diagnosed with microdeletion 1q21.1, and they sort of say, well, you were sick. You were a sick child. Therefore, she didn't have Munchausen by proxy. Or she was never formally diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy. So
now, guys, y'all listen to what this lady's going to say, because this is just ridiculous. This is ridiculous because she could have moved out. That's the thing. She could have moved out. and naysayers. You know, I mean,
How are we labeling it that? And maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
I can. And that's something that we talked about a little bit when we talked for your show. That's a really common misperception / bad faith argument, depending on who's making it. Because there are people who are very invested in the idea that this just isn't a real form of abuse. And so that is an argument.
no, nobody, no, I don't, and none of the naysayers have ever said that Munchausen by proxy is not a real abuse. It is. It totally is. And my heart goes out to anyone. And we've heard the story, especially, I can't remember right now, that little boy that his mother put salt in his, in him. And it really is. But our argument is, hey, she was an adult. She did not have to commit murder. She didn't have to commit that. She didn't have to do that. Yes, Lacey Spears. And that's our argument, is that she did not have to commit. She was 6 years. She's been an adult for 6 years. She could have left.
That they use. So number one, there is it's a complete false argument that if a child has a real health condition, that means that is sort of exculpatory, right? That means abuse is not happening. Of course, abuse can happen if a person has a real thing, because Munchausen by proxy abuse encompasses exaggerating, inducing, and fabricating.
And it is also making your child sick. That's the big thing, making your child sick.
Illnesses in a child. And so I don't know anything about your genetic condition that you do have, but I would guess that quite a lot of the interventions that your mom, applied had nothing to do with your condition. And so it doesn't mean that they can't make it worse, and we know, and also, so there's that, and that comes up a lot, right? Like a lot of perpetrators will say, well, I got this diagnosis from a doctor. Well, okay, but if you got that diagnosis from a doctor and you use deception to do it, well, then that's abuse. And even if that diagnosis is real, if you were making the condition worse, if you were lying to doctors about symptoms, if you were pushing for unnecessary
But Dee Dee left Gypsy in the room with the doctors to talk to the doctors. She stood up, and she's complicit. Because even in her interrogation, she was talking about that she's sick, and that's the sad thing. And I just think that this woman, she has really ruined her reputation. How can anybody even believe who comes on her podcast now? Because she did not do her homework.
Interventions, those things are all still abuse. So abuse can absolutely still happen with a child that has a real condition. And that's just a complete misunderstanding of this abuse to say that it can't. And as to the second thing of being formally, diagnosed. Your mom was not criminally convicted and she's not formally diagnosed.
So why are they ruining her name? It's against the law for them to be diagnosing Dee Dee. They're diagnosing Dee Dee is what they're doing. And too bad that Dee Dee's family has acted the way they have. Too bad they could not come and take a stand for Dee Dee Blanchard. I just think that is just horrible, because nobody but us is actually standing up for this woman. Nobody is saying that Dee Dee is a saint. We're not saying that. She was a con woman. She did some things wrong. Yes. But she did have a sick child.
There is still evidence of abuse because of your experience, because of what
I would love to see the evidence of abuse. That's what we've been asking. Show us the evidence.
Doctors have reported because of what's in your medical records. And
she has not even read her medical records. This woman, what is she talking about? What's in the medical records? Because we actually seen Becca Scoops has read the medical records. A lot of us have read it. The abuse, it's just not there. There's no evidence whatsoever.
It is actually typically how, and I'm curious to know about how your process of how you were able to put a name to it. But that is, I think, again, a misunderstanding of Munchausen by proxy being primarily this diagnosis, the psychiatric diagnosis of factitious disorder imposed on another. It is in the DSM, but it's abuse, it's a crime, and there either is evidence of that crime or there is not evidence of that crime.
Correct. And there's no evidence. There's no evidence of that crime at all. They used it as a defense. It was a defense. There's no evidence that even happened.
And in your case, there is evidence of the crime of your mother's abuse. And therefore, there is no legitimate question of whether or not you suffered abuse. And anyone who's saying that there is at this point, as your story has been well explored, and Mark Feldman obviously participated in the documentary. He's as unassailable of an expert as there is. There is no legitimate question about that.
Mark Feldman, if you look into it, he never read all of the medical records. Oh, thank you so much, Boss Babe. Thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to know, obviously, while you were in the situation, you understood that something was wrong, something bad was happening. When did you first discover that this was a thing called Munchausen by proxy? What was that sort of process of revelation for you?
What's so interesting is when I was living in the abuse, I didn't even know that it was abuse. I thought my mom's weird, my mom's overbearing, controlling. It's like I didn't have the language to articulate what I was going through. And there were people that I reached out to. Everybody was like, well, why didn't you tell someone? Why didn't you ask for help? It was that I was saying things like, don't tell my mom this, but I'm telling you this, or my mom's a little controlling. She's a helicopter mom. But I didn't have the like.
How in the world was Dee Dee a helicopter mom? If she was a helicopter mom, there's no way Gypsy would have been able to make over 100 videos. And she was sitting right there in the living room. She was naked in the living room making videos, but her mom was a helicopter mom. What world does that make any sense of? What world? A helicopter mom would have been right there with Gypsy. There would have been no time for her to make a video. She would not have had a laptop. She would have not had a phone. She would have not had anything. She would have not been able to reach out to the outside world, but Gypsy had every way to get a hold of anyone. So this is just insane for her to say this.
Which to articulate, I'm being abused. This is what's going on.
So you were just talking about how one of the things people have said to you is sort of like, why didn't you speak up? Which, by the way, is an unfair expectation to put on any child that's being abused or any young person that's in an abuse situation, especially one as complicated as Munchausen by proxy. So you were saying that you were making comments sometimes to people in your life, and there were obviously signs. There were obviously red flags for what was happening to you. And I have to believe that
red flags. Why didn't her dad notice any? Why is nobody asking the questions of Rod and Christy? Why does nobody ask these questions? That's the funny thing. Nobody is asking questions of them. It's like Rod was a deadbeat father and he's getting celebrated. And he was a deadbeat father, leaving everything for Dee Dee to do. Dee Dee had to worry about Gypsy's going to the doctor, putting a roof over her head, making sure she has food to eat, making sure she's eating. But what was Rod doing at this time?
If, your dad in particular understood what Munchausen by proxy looked like, if the doctors who were treating you, which we'll talk about in a moment, had maybe better understood what Munchausen by proxy was, there might have been some more intervention, but that should never be put on the person who's being victimized, especially because how intense the psychological manipulation is. Like victims in the midst of this are often not going to have that framing. And so we can't expect victims to be like, hey, I'm being victimized in this specific way. Here is the intervention. Please execute it on my behalf.
Right.
But she can make sex videos and have a phone and put it right in her private area to send to Nicholas Godejohn. She can do that. She can make all these videos and cosplay 10 different characters and do all of that. That's the funny thing. She was not being abused. My goodness. And she's almost 24 years old. She could leave at any time.
Right, exactly. And so it's like my father, he didn't understand what Munchausen by proxy was before all this happened. Obviously to some degree, I think my mother did. But
all right, let's throw Dee Dee under the bus some more. Why don't we? Let's make sure that we just tear her up and just make sure that she has no kind of good reputation. You leave off everything that she's ever done for you.
As for myself, I didn't understand. I never heard of Munchausen by proxy before. It was not something that I ever read about, heard about, watched a TV show about. So it wasn't until after being arrested that, I'm sitting there having an attorney visit with my public defender, and I'm just, telling him all of this stuff, still in my frame of reference of not having the language to explain what I was going through. But he was able to get a lot of what was going on from medical records. I mean, the first thing that flagged it is I could walk.
But what about the video of you lying to your mother? And we know that Gypsy was walking. She was walking in her house. She knew exactly what was going on. She knew exactly how they were getting money into that household. She knew all of it. Thank you, main chick. Thank you so much for the super sticker.
It's like it's not like he had to dig and try to find this out. It was pretty easy by just looking at the fact that I could walk, and then kind of like where she could walk. So how is this happening? Because
and why were you almost 24 years old and you didn't leave the house to get out of this? It wasn't like you guys remember there was a case where it was a stepson, I think it was locked in a bedroom by his stepmother for years and years and years. And I think there was a fire or something that happened. He finally was able to escape. But the stepmother had locking keys, locking him in that bedroom where he couldn't talk to anybody or anything. Do you guys remember that? But not Gypsy. She could come and go as she wanted. Look at the Foyas. Anytime that she went outside, she would get in that wheelchair, but she didn't want to tell anybody that she could walk because she was scared all of her friends would be mad at her, and she wanted everybody to like her. Oh, it just makes me mad.
She's supposedly paralyzed. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, yours is a case where, and it's not always this obvious. Yours is a case that was pretty obvious. I think that's almost like the classic thing, right? Of like, a couple things that came up in your case, right? The sort of like, oh, they have these alleged issues with eating that are not real.
But she did have a problem with eating. She was in a feeding hospital for a month. And if this lady would have done some type of research at all, then she would see that there was inconsistencies in Gypsy's story. But people like this don't even want to look. It's like they're scared to even look and go any further than what the narrative Gypsy wants to put out.
In a wheelchair and they can't move except that they can. And, I think the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you were technically, chronologically, an adult when those events took place. There is kind of there are these sort of like two points where interventions could have happened to prevent the worst possible outcome. And, one of them is when you're a child, right? And then you're talking about child welfare and an intervention that involves custody and that kind of thing. And obviously.
And if you remember, DCS did come to her home, spoke to Gypsy alone without Dee Dee. And the way Gypsy acted, it made the police think that Gypsy had a mental problem. Like she was, I just don't get it. I don't get it. Oh, thank you, Sandy D, for the $1.99 super chat. Thank you so much. So she is going to have to blame herself on that too. Because why would somebody think that she had a mental disorder by talking to her unless she was acting like she was?
In your case, that didn't happen. And I'm so sorry that didn't happen. You deserved better. You didn't deserve to be left in that situation. And then there's this other period where you're an adult, but obviously part of your story is that you were deceived about your actual age and deceived about your abilities to live an independent life. And that's a very common part of this dynamic, is that I've seen many, teenagers, young adults, their parent will try everything to keep them under their control, under their roof. They will convince them that they will never be able to live an adult life. That's an extremely common part of this story. And so Dee
Dee wanted Gypsy to leave. Dee Dee was tired, and we have Dee Dee's, Dee Dee was looking on the internet. She was wanting Gypsy out. She didn't want Gypsy to be there anymore. She was done. She was sick of it.
I think that's another thing that people are really not aware of, is that you are not out of the woods once you are, physically grown. Right. And so, you had a couple of attempts to leave before you got together with Nick and all of that. So can you give us some insight on, that piece of the experience? And, you talked about what you wish someone had done when you were a child. What about during that period? What would have helped you get safely out of that situation once you were no longer a child?
Absolutely. That's a question that, and that's a weight that I put on myself, is that, when I was a child, it's kind of like, okay, I'm helpless. There's very little that I can do. And then once I became an adult, the power dynamic sort of shifts, and the blame sort of shifts, I guess, even on my own shoulders. It's kind of like a coulda, shoulda, woulda thing. And so, yes, there were many times that I probably could have ran away. I did attempt twice, failed attempts. There were times that
Kitty wasn't looking for you. Dan, the people that Dan was living with, I can see it now. And I know this is allegedly, but I can see this now. Can't you see the people that Dan lived with? They're like, Dee Dee, she is here. You need to come and get your daughter. She cannot stay here. So, yeah. I'm at 1234 Main Street. Come and get your child. That was happening. Guys, that was happening. They didn't want Gypsy there. Oh my gosh.
Could have called the police, but was too afraid to. But at the end of the day, I do feel like even though I was an adult, I was working with a maturity level that was not up to date with my chronological age. So yes, I was 24 when I got arrested, but mentally and emotionally, my development was stunted.
Thank you so much, Mama Bear, for the $4.99 super sticker. Thank you so much. And what is she talking about? She was stunted in growth. She wasn't. She was cosplaying it. She was cosplaying. She was trying to get away with murder. She wanted her mother out of the way And like a bunch of you guys said, because she thought she was going to get that house. And I think that it was either going to be Dan or someone else was going to move in there with her and they were going to live happily ever after. I think that's what she had in her mind. She didn't want she didn't want to go home with Nicholas. I think that she went with Nicholas just because that was something happened and that was the only thing that she could do at that time because nobody else wanted to have anything to do with her. And
so I could have been, a teenager in that mind frame because of zero life experience. Most people mature and grow with what? Life experience. So if you don't.
And she's had life experience. She had it. She's acting like she was just sitting, she was locked up in the house, never going anywhere, not having any friends. But we all know that's not the truth. That's not the truth of the situation. She had life experiences. She just wanted to be greedy. And she's narcissist. Everything's about her, in my opinion.
Have that as your foundation. You're not working up to date with your age, I guess. And you don't think about these alternatives. And so for me,
Nick asked you to leave. Nick asked her to run away. And she said no, that her mother had to die. That is what she told him.
I just kind of wish that I would have had the language to say, hey, I think my mom has Munchausen by proxy. I wish I would have heard of it back then so I could have told someone. But again, it's kind of like hindsight's 2020 and I can't go back now. So it's just.
Yeah, no. And I don't think it's, the purpose of sort of asking you about that is not about your personal regrets or what have you. I mean, I think it's really healthy that you take accountability for your actions. I think that's appropriate. And I think that framing for people and their understanding of this story is really important because I think if people are projecting what they themselves might have been like at 24, right? Like when I was 24, I was in my, first job in New York City after graduating college when I was 22 and had, all kinds of like healthy.
And nobody's saying that and nobody knows what they will do in a situation. Nobody's projecting that. But just leave. You can see the videos of her and her mom. Her mom was not scary. Just like they said Nick was scary. I'm sorry. I think it's laughable. But she could have left. She could have left. Because she spoke with her dad. She spoke with Christy, and Christy knew what was going on. They all knew what was going on. Hey, I wouldn't even doubt that they knew what was going on. They knew that they were scamming these nonprofits. I almost bet you that they knew that. It would be very interesting to know what Rod and Christy knew and when they knew it.
Support systems and was encouraged to be independent by my parents and had all kinds of experiences with peers that develop, it's like just like all of those things are purposefully kept from Munchausen by proxy survivors in the vast majority of in many cases, especially like sort of the cases on the extreme ends. They're not in school. They're not allowed to have relationships with peers. They're not allowed to have romantic relationships and develop all of those things and try things and fail and develop a sense of independence. And they're often told, which I believe you were in your case, you'll never live an independent life. You'll always need me and you're going to die young. And so that's like they create a very purposeful terror of the outside world. So the expectation.
I think that Dee Dee wanted her out. Dee Dee wanted her. But I think that Dee Dee was also being truthful on what she had because there was not a lot of information on what she had at that point in time. But if you notice, once she got that diagnosis, Dee Dee wasn't rushing to the doctor anymore. She wasn't going to all of that stuff anymore. Most of the going to the doctor was over. And not only that, Gypsy was signing for her own medical stuff at the age of 18.
and that you could just leave, I think is just an absolute misunderstanding of the situation. And I don't know. I would love to think that the police would have given you some helpful resources. Truthfully, I don't know, because there are plenty of police that don't even understand that this is a crime when it involves a small child. So having an adult call them and
well, it's just like us thinking that somebody that's a podcaster and that's going to put out information would actually do their research and look on both sides and look at the FOIAs, because everybody knows the FOIAs are out because you just open up TikTok and you see all this stuff. You can't tell me that this woman doesn't know that the FOIAs are out and that this is her story is flawed. It's more than flawed. And to me, how she is acting with Dee Dee's name should be criminal.
Say I'm in this situation. I don't know.
That could have been intervention, such as, my mother claimed that I was homeschooled. And as a small child, yes, she did homeschool me for a small time. But then she became, got to the point where she didn't want to anymore. And there was, she was telling the doctors in the hospital, oh, she's homeschooled. Her homeschool, we call it Angel Heart Academy, and give them that information.
And she was buying books for you. So yeah, she was homeschooling you. You were being homeschooled, Gypsy. Now, whether or not you were actually listening or doing the work could be a different thing. But I think that Dee Dee felt with the way you acted that she couldn't send you to school.
But it was never registered with an actual school district, and it was never followed up with. And so that was something that I fell through the cracks with. So it's kind of like, yes, the, school districts could have helped had I been, aligned with that, with real homeschooling or something. And then
she was aligned with real homeschooling, and there is evidence that Gypsy was enrolled, and it was, and because I homeschooled my child, and my child was born the same year that Gypsy was born, and you have to turn things in. And I just don't think it's the way she's saying, because there is evidence that she was enrolled in school.
And there's just other avenues and other things that could have been those points in which intervention could have happened. And it's just like falling through the cracks of every single one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's deliberate, right? I mean, that isolation is deliberate.
But she wasn't isolated. She had friends. She was going places, Disney, Cape Cod. She was going outside. She was not isolated one bit.
The homeschooling thing comes up in so many, not just Munchausen by proxy cases, but other abuse situations where, and of course, there are many homeschool families and homeschool parents that are not abusive. But unfortunately, it creates for opportunistic abusers, it creates a situation where you don't have the child exposed to the outside world, and importantly, mandatory reporters of abuse, right? And a lot of reports about Munchausen by proxy come from schools, because those teachers and school nurses and administrators are, if the child is in school, they're very aware of the child being taken out of school for long periods of time, and they're observing the child for longer periods during the day. My oldest is in school. She's at school all day long, right? If I was telling the school, oh, she has this seizure disorder and she has all these things and all of these problems, and then they're observing her being a normal child during the day, they're going to have an inkling that something is up. So that is, I think, a part of the reason why they keep them out of school, right? They don't want other eyes on the child. And I think eyes on the child is always healthy for the child. I don't think there's any argument for a child being isolated at home with one parent. Right. Even in situations where, children have profound disabilities, what we hear from those parents, and we have, a fair number of parents of disabled kids that listen to the show. So I've, talked to them and heard their feedback, is that they really try so hard to have their children have normal experience, quote, sort of normal experiences, or just like interactions with their peers, have as much of a life outside of their medical situations as possible. And
she did. She had friends. And, there was times that Dee Dee took her out, and I think I did a video on it, where she was mean to other children. She was mean to her peers. If you guys, there was a story where a little girl asked her why her voice changes the way it does, and she threatened the little girl. So I think Dee Dee was scared on how Gypsy was going to react to these kids.
So, like, there's just no scenario, I think, where having a child be isolated that profoundly could ever be good for a child.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. And so, you know, you were in a situation, which is, again, very common, where doctors clearly suspected abuse. You know, the doctors who spoke in the documentary describe this, you know, one of them, I believe, describes seeing you walk and that you were in a wheelchair. And I think
and that's the one that Gypsy said, I don't remember that. That never happened. He lied. Because if I had done that, my mother, I would have been in a lot of trouble with my mother. So why isn't this lady saying something about that? That is the strange thing to me, that this woman is just going right in with Gypsy's narrative.
Those of us that are knowledgeable about abuse just absolutely tearing our hair out at that comment, because you understand that this doctor is breaching their ethics and honestly breaking mandatory reporting laws, because I just think, sir, you're describing a massive red flag for abuse and you did not report it. And,
Right.
you know, we've covered situations on this show, a couple of them, where children died because of doctors' failure to report abuse that they suspected, that they knew about, that they described very accurately, like what you are describing as abuse, and you are describing a situation where you did not report it.
And I think what is so sad is she this is a great idea as a podcast, but after people listening to what she's saying with the Gypsy Rose case, nobody's going to listen to this woman. Because this woman did not do her research. So how can you believe anything that this woman says now? Because she didn't do her research. So you can't believe anything that she says.
I'd imagine that's really a hard thing for you to reflect on. And actually, you talked in an interview about that you at some point were considering legal action against some of those doctors.
I was. And the only reason why I haven't.
Now, this is a big thing. Now, Barbara Ann talked about this. Isn't it funny that on the website for Scumfield, did you know that he takes cases for medical malpractice? He does. So if in those medical records, it showed that there was any kind of malpractice, Scumfield would have been right on it. Because think how much money Scumfield would have made if he did that and they won. What do they make? About 30% of whatever money they win in the lawsuit. So if she had a case, he would have filed that back 10 years ago, and it never was, because there's no case of malpractice at all.
I was in prison for 8.5 years after all of this, sort of happened. And so in the time that I was in prison, a lot of people are like, well, you could have had all the time in the world to build your case up, but it's like, I didn't have access to the internet to try to find lawyers and do all this sort of outreach and all this kind of.
You had an attorney that could have filed for you. You had an attorney that was talking to your father and your stepmother, and you know how greedy Rod and Christy are. They would have been head first in trying to get a lawsuit and trying to make sure that they got some money, because they were digging deep into Gypsy's money. We know that for a fact.
Stuff, it wasn't accessible to the fullest ability at that time. And then once I got out, It's like with everything, with the media and the documentaries, writing my book, then getting pregnant, and my
she was so busy because she had to, commit adultery and get pregnant behind her husband's back with another man. She just didn't have time to look into all of that because she had to do all of that. So where's the time coming in? Because, she had to go and have sex with her husband and then with her man boy on the side. Just too much stuff to do.
my pregnancy, it's like life was just way too much to take on now another court case.
And just think about it, because she's never even had a 9 to 5, but she's so busy, but she can't work. Can't have a 9 to 5, can't actually make real money because I like to live off the blood money.
So it's like, yes, now that I am starting to kind of settle into a calmer life, I can reconsider that avenue and see, number one, statute of limitation.
I guess she has a calmer life, even though her bestie is doing mathematics. Yeah, that's a calmer life right there.
What are the statute of limitations? If they have expired, then that time is up. There's nothing I can really do, right?
Thank you so much for listening to the first part of my conversation.
All right. So that's the end of part 1. So I'm guessing part 2 is going to be in probably next week. And I'm going to be looking it up. And as soon as I find out it's coming up, I'm going to bring it to you guys. Thank you all for all your super chats. Thanks for coming and talking with me. Thanks for the comments, the cash ups. Thanks for everything. And guys, I will have some more videos later. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.